So we're going to move on to our next speaker, is Dr. Elizabeth McCarthy, co-organizer and co-host, whom we didn't get to introduce earlier on due to technical issues. But Elizabeth is now going to speak. Her title is A Qualitative Exploration of Breastfeeding Support Groups in Ireland from the Woman's Perspective. Elizabeth is an academic researcher now working with NUI Galway. She's also an IBCLC and a peer support worker working with Lalish League. So thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Eileen. Apologies for the IT issues earlier. So I'm going to discuss a paper that I published last year, which came from my PhD. And just moving on. Sorry, yes, okay, so that's the paper published in Midwifery. And here we go into this main part. So I quite like my art, so sorry, they just seem to be moving on a bit quickly here. All right. Okay, so I'll be interspersing these throughout, the little paintings that I quite like. So the background to breastfeeding, why did I do this study at all? So there are significant positive long-term impacts for mother and child, and several references there also to my good colleague here, Nigel Rowlands, who's kindly joined us, about the short and long-term health, economic and environmental benefits for society. And I think while it's well known that there are all these benefits for society, unfortunately in Ireland we have the lowest rates in the whole of the OECD by quite a long way. And even though it is appreciated that breastfeeding is the norm, the biological norm, it's not the cultural norm, particularly in Ireland. And the reason for my PhD originally on this paper was that women's perspectives on breastfeeding support are not well researched. So while there may be many articles from a health professional's view or on health professionals who initiate and facilitate breastfeeding peer support, not on peer support directly, and I'll go on to give the definitions on the peer support. Sorry, the lex not, yeah, okay. So there are tensions and contradictions in that artificial feeding is viewed as the cultural norm in Ireland, according to literature in Ireland. Although mothers are well aware of, and I don't yet like using the term health benefits because it is the norm of breastfeeding for babies. So there's a disconnect between policy and what's happening on the ground. So the aim was to explore women's experiences of breastfeeding support groups from their perspective, bearing in mind that this research was all carried out pre-COVID. I will ask the question at the very end, where do we go from here in our new normal, where mothers cannot actually see each other in a group face-to-face. So peer support is systematic support between two persons or in a group where the participants are equal. Usually experienced breastfeeding women who are outside the woman's existing network, so not necessarily not in the family, but other women who they perceive as being similar to them. And participants it's a dynamic, so it's a two-way process for mothers who are considered active participants in that process of support. So just a little study I did a few years ago kind of highlights how low at that stage, and it's not much improved, how Ireland relates to other countries who are also English speaking and of similar cultural background. So the 6 main themes that occurred in the qualitative aspect of my mixed methods PhD was the complexity of breastfeeding support, community and connection, the impact of culture, the journey, many mothers refer to the breastfeeding journey, the passing on and what mothers want. So I just quickly go through these and a few quotes. So this is Nina, who's talking about everyone's telling you what to do, but there's not actual practical help as such. Many mothers go to multiple sources of support, which is wonderful because we're all doing the same thing in the end. So while La Leche League is there, and I am a La Leche League leader, all my colleagues in Cuidiú, Facebook groups, the Friends of Breastfeeding, and so on, we're all trying to do the same thing. We all collaborate together and we all get on really well, and that's really good because it's not a competition between peer support groups. We're all there to support the mothers. So this particular, I hadn't included the public health nurse groups initially in my study, but I felt I had to. So in Ireland, the public health nurses are running breastfeeding support groups locally. And because all the mothers seemed to be going to them, actually, especially in the first 6 weeks, I did include them then because they were used as a stepping stone onto others' peer support later. So it was like a natural movement on from the initial meeting of other people. So in community and connection, really mothers go to meet other mothers. That is the main reason that a mother goes to a breastfeeding support group, and not necessarily with a problem. To have a one-to-one contact with other people. As all of you who are breastfeeding supporters on here or involved in any type of breastfeeding support, you will know that the food and drink is probably the most important part of the whole thing. And it's sometimes some groups were struggling initially, certainly with the PHN groups, because of not being able to share food. But this has going to have implications from now on, which are new normal, when mothers cannot physically get together, because it was the home baking and it was nurturing through the tummy, as Lisa described it, and when people share food together. That's what's so important. So the issue of the safe space, also, that mothers felt that it, probably even the way the room was set out was very important to facilitate conversation where you can relax. So it was more homely. However, a lot of groups are now meeting in restaurants and public spaces, and that's great too, because it makes breastfeeding more visible, but also it can also be relaxing. The groups, they felt that the convenience and location of the groups were very important. Again, that's something we need to think about now during the pandemic, as mothers are accessing a lot of online. So it actually probably doesn't matter for the moment where one lives to access a breastfeeding support group if it's online. So the impact of culture. So even experienced mothers who had a baby before and breastfed still felt on their second, third baby or more that there was always a few little niggles, because each baby is different and each mother is different at that stage of her journey as well. So some mothers go along again on second and third baby, but also for the fun and the food as well, and the friendships. Family can be positive, but they can also be negative, particularly if they haven't had direct experience of breastfeeding. And then we were onto the journey itself. So ages and stages seem to be quite important. Mothers did speak about being friends with other mothers who had babies who were similar age and stage. They felt they identified with them, but they also loved the fact that there were mothers ahead of them in their journey, and also the new mothers coming up behind. And also the journey itself is up and down and has different stages and brings you to a place. Again, the friendships I mentioned, just to make a note that all of the photos that I'm using in this slideshow, I have permission from all the mothers to use. And some of these are from La Leche League Trinity group, which we're meeting in the pavilion on campus. So yes, lots of friendships came out of that group, but of all groups they do. Mothers talked about having goals, and wanting to reach those goals, and every mother's goals are different, and sometimes they change as the journey proceeds. Some mothers may start off with a goal of, feeding for a certain amount of time, and then find it changes. This was one of quite a strong theme of passing on. Mothers spoke of the very strong need they felt to be a role model for others, but also to pass on to other mothers what they had learnt, sometimes the hard way, but also to pass on the positivity that things do change. While there might be issues in the beginning, it will pass. So empowering other mothers. So mothers felt a very strong need. They talked about up-to-date, correct information, really trying to counter any negative or incorrect information that mothers may have heard or been told. So what do mothers want? So they wanted breastfeeding solution. They would like breastfeeding supporters to be trained. They want to get support from people who have breastfeeding experience, and community breastfeeding promotion to be more visible. The experience of another mother having breastfed herself is quite powerful, actually. That does not mean that people who haven't breastfed cannot support mothers. Of course they can. But it does add that extra for the mothers, that they feel they're talking to someone who's been in their shoes. So solutions they wanted as well. They wanted practical solutions that they could work out together with another person, which is why they really valued peer support particularly, because they didn't feel they were being told what to do or having a judgment, even though I do know that all my gigs in the lactation world, sorry, this seems to have gone off by itself. We'll try and get back to it. Do not ever pass along judgment or expectations on a mother. Everybody's trying to help the mother to achieve her own goals. Sorry about that. I'm just going to go swiftly on to get back to where I was. So yes, they felt that it was important to be able to access accurate sources of information that they could use, along with bringing, because breastfeeding supporters, when they provide this sort of information, they always suggest to mothers that they bring it with them to discuss with their health professional. Okay, so trained supporters. So it was like they were just there to meet up. Some mothers felt that when they went to some groups, particularly perhaps in a coffee morning session, sorry, Eileen, it's happening again there now. Yes, thank you.
You want to tell me to move to the next slide? It's
yeah,
easy.
please do. Yeah, please, Eileen, thank you. So some mothers, maybe when they were in a group, especially if there was a lot of people, if they were shy or whatever, sometimes that was difficult for them to come forward, and sometimes they felt a bit excluded. So it's something for that most peer support groups are, well, all peer support groups are aware of, but it's something that we all need to individually be aware of, that not everybody is forthcoming, and confident to speak up in a large group. Next slide, please, Eileen. So yes, again, the breastfeeding experience was very important, that for mothers, that they felt, at least if they were talking to someone who had breastfed before, that they know what the struggles were and they were in their shoes, as it were. Next slide, please, Eileen. So a lot of the mothers felt strongly, and it's like other issues we were talking before with previous speakers, that breastfeeding is a community and society issue. It's not an individual mother issue. It's very difficult for a mother to sort of battle away if she wants to breastfeed without support, perhaps in her immediate family and community, but also in the wider community, that if it was more acceptable as being the norm, which other speakers are going to talk about in other contexts, that it might be that bit easier for them. Next slide, please, Eileen. Great, so this is my pre-COVID group, and then our during COVID. So many Leche League leaders, Quidju and Friends of Breastfeeding and so on, all around the country, running online groups and doing the best we can to support mothers, particularly in these very challenging times for mums and their babies and their families and partners. So breastfeeding supporters, yes, unfortunately my another paper will have to be written on the post or during COVID situation. So last slide, please, Eileen. So that is my question, which I cannot answer today, I'm afraid, and it'll be for this time forward. I know Nigel did do very good talk there on the COVID situation, so I'm very delighted to cover that. And thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the webinar.